And now, it's time to Stand for Truth with the host of Stand for Truth Radio, Susan Knowles.
And welcome, everybody. Welcome to Stand for Truth Radio with Susan Knowles. I am your host, Susan Knowles. Please check out my website at susanknowles.com. And don't forget to follow Stand for Truth Radio with the variety of shows that I do, such as Knowles on the News and God's Views on Political News with my co-host, Bill Cloud. To hear all the podcasts, just go to Spreaker.com or download the Spreaker phone app and type in Susan Knowles. All the shows can also be heard on iHeartRadio, and now the easiest way to find that is just go to susanknowles.com and click on the big iHeartRadio logo that you'll see, and it will take you right there to all the podcasts. Finally, follow me on Twitter at Susan Knowles. Now, my guest today is a returning guest, Benjamin Krause. He's an award-winning veterans' rights attorney and journalist who investigates government fraud, waste, and abuse within the Department of Veterans Affairs. He uses advanced cyber advocacy techniques to help disabled veterans access the benefits they deserve while ensuring the VA does not misallocate resources. He is considered an authority on veterans' rights. His work has been featured within various media outlets, including NBC, Bloomberg News, Foreign Policy, CBS, Fox News, Washington Times, National Review, and Star Tribune. Benjamin is a disabled veteran of the U.S. Air Force, where he served in its Special Operations Command. After receiving an honorable discharge, he fought with the agency for 15 years to finally win his benefits. After the military, he studied economics at Northwestern University, attended law school at the University of Minnesota, where he graduated magna cum laude. Benjamin writes about veterans issues regularly on the website disabledveterans.org. Welcome back to the show, Benjamin Krause. Benjamin, how are you?
Hey, Susan, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to see you. I'm always glad to have you here. Today, we're doing a little something different. We're having a live video chat, and we may have people asking questions or making comments, and I'll interrupt you a little bit when we're talking to maybe do some of that. It's something new, so we'll have to see how many people actually found us today for this show. But I hope to have you back to, as we go through this administration with this VA secretary, I want to know, what's changing and what's new. So let's get started. I want to talk with you about the Hines VA Hospital in Chicago and what's been happening there. Can you talk about that?
Hines is probably one of the most corrupt and disinterested areas or hospitals with administration that exist today. To give a little bit of background, Sharon Hellman used to run that facility before she moved on to Phoenix, Arizona. Later, of course, Phoenix is the hot button single source of the now nationwide scandal related to the wait time fraud, where VA employees falsified data to keep veterans from health care and also to bolster their own pockets with respect to heightened bonuses. In that instance, some veterans died. Most would say a lot of veterans died. Approximately 200 died in relation to the wait time scandal there. And Sharon Hellman was at the helm, and her management schemes, or whatever you would call it, were at play at that location. Now, previously, she received a great deal of her management training and experience at Hines VA before that point. Hines VA has been the source of probably the most scandals year to year than any other VA that I am aware of, whether it's related to outright fraud against Medicare by some of its doctors or performing unneeded or unwarranted heart surgeries on veterans who perhaps maybe later die, or not reading ECGs within a reasonable amount of time, again, to the point where veterans die, etc. That all goes on at Hines. And not only do they eventually get caught for the schemes that are rolled out there, but they continue to perpetrate new schemes. And I think the most recent was exposed last week, where a whistleblower was dissatisfied with a lot of different things related to the quality of the food that was being served to veterans and to staff, such as raw chicken, which is very dangerous, mice decaying in the facility, roaches. In another report from a different whistleblower, the head of nutrition at the facility was caught selling her own handbags and whatnot while she's supposed to be working. There are a lot of things going on there. So in this particular instance, the whistleblowers have brought up the problems to other individuals within the VA facility and within Heinz to try to get it corrected. Nothing has happened over the past year, so they came forward with images of the raw chicken and with images of expired food that then they were serving the veterans. And that is what we have going on at Heinz. So cockroaches at the facility, veterans' corpses liquefying while they decay because they won't release the bodies to the family members where they demand some kinds of final payments from the family. There are a lot of problems there.
That sounds unreal to me. I went to your website and I saw the picture that somebody had taken of the raw chicken. And it was, if that's the picture, I mean, it was obvious that chicken was raw. What happened? Was that a number? Was this a mistake? Was just, one person got it? What's the story on that?
Well, supposedly this is going on and has been going on for some time. The image of the raw chicken was merely to illustrate how raw the chicken was in that particular instance, but apparently raw food has been served to veterans for a while. And over the past year, the individuals responsible for it just didn't do anything about it. So they then exposed it to the Daily Caller.
And I thought with David Shulkin, the VA secretary, I thought this was supposed to start clearing things up. I thought we were supposed to start seeing a new and different VA. I mean, is he not aware of these things?
I think I would liken Secretary Shulkin's tenure to this point, which we're at about 100 and some odd days since President Trump took office, and Secretary Shulkin didn't take over as the head of the VA until sometime in February. And I would say up until recently, they didn't even have photos of him or President Trump on the walls. So I would say that any of the policies that Secretary Shulkin may be implementing that are new haven't yet had time to take fruition. So like President Trump, for example, where we're not seeing a lot of his policies with a few exceptions of the executive orders he's tried to implement. But aside from that, within the actual agencies and respective agencies, a lot of the individuals who are in place have been in place since President Obama had taken office in 2008 and even before then. So we're not really seeing what Secretary Shulkin will or won't do at this point in time. I think a fairer gauge would probably be by the end of the year. A lot of the policies and reforms that were in place or have been worked towards are going to be in place probably in the next 6 months. And then we'll start to see really what his decision-making is going to be all about at that point.
So the woman that was supposedly selling the handbags was somebody who is she's a staff member responsible for nutrition in the area. And right. So, kind of ironic, we're getting raw chicken when we have a woman who's in charge of nutrition, supposedly selling handbags as her second business. Has anything been done that you know of to this particular lady, or?
She's been reported as far as I know, and nothing has been done.
Okay. Wow. And also, I understand, were there accusations there in that same facility with mold and wait list type issues as well?
Correct. So they also had a wait list scheme going. They've also had problems with mold. I think that's more recent. They've had problems with whistleblower retaliation. That's also one of the facilities where they were encouraging veterans to surreptitiously record doctors during doctor exams, but the veterans wouldn't have access to the recordings. It was done for the purpose of supposed research, where the researcher's name was Dr. Anthony Weiner, who was trying to publish a book at Oxford. Part of that research was the benefit of recording doctor engagements with veterans, but when they put forth the IRB, they failed to take into account the impact of the actual veteran. In fact, they didn't consider the veteran as one of the human subjects of the research. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So that's something else that we see at Heinz and at Jesse Brown VA, where they're also encouraging veterans to, with no benefit to the veteran, record these doctor interactions. And of course, if you happen to record patient harassment, malpractice, anything like that, you can't get those records. So there's really no benefit to the veteran to do it whatsoever. And they were cherry picking veterans in different waiting rooms, not having them sign informed consent waivers or things like that. When we investigated back, I think it was about a year and a half ago, they have since, as far as I know, started that research over again, but we were able to put it on hold for about a year while they investigated.
Well, and I also want to take the opportunity, the people that are listening in our live chat, feel free to, write any comments there as we're talking or ask any questions, and we'll take them as we can. But feel free to do that. Ben, you had mentioned about the rotting corpses that are allegedly at this VA Hines Hospital, and I wanted to know: aren't there state violations that this would be involved, and even federal violations of allowing this type of thing to happen?
Yes, one would assume, and I'm sorry, I'm monkeying with my system here. Sorry about that. Can you say that again?
Yeah, I was saying, at this hospital, you had talked about there's rotting corpses, supposedly. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, aren't there federal and state violations that would be involved with that and doing that? And outside of the VA looking at it, aren't there other violations that they're doing within the state and federal government?
So I would say the answer is yes. The VA is a walking time bomb of criminality and scandal and corruption, scheming to restrict veterans from their benefits and from the health care they're entitled to at every step of the way behind the scenes. So I think the bean counters from central office and from the VISNs are putting a lot of the directors at the VA health centers in a bit of a catch-22 where they're not allowed to publicly speak out about the lack of resources they have at the local facility, but then hamstringing them when a problem comes up and making them look stupid in the press when they get pinched in an OIG investigation or something like that, where they're not allowed to speak publicly about how VACO or the VISN had restricted their access to funding, which wasn't exactly your question. I accidentally talked around it. I apologize. That's the lawyer in me,
I know. Are you a politician or what?
Sorry. So bring me back to center here. I apologize. I went in a different direction with that question.
No, I just feel that, if you're talking about rotting corpses, I don't care what hospital that is, there's got to be some state or federal violation that's going on that I would think that people outside of the VA would want to look into and maybe become involved, and maybe they should and they haven't.
Right.
But I don't know if that's because they don't know or what the case might be.
Well, you look at the case, the instance of Toma VA, where the DEA started an investigation into the acts of Dr. David Houlihan and some of his associates at that facility because of the excessive prescriptive practices of opiates that resulted in some veterans apparently dying, or at least that was reported to us. DEA did an investigation. We don't know what happened as a result of that. We also know the state of Wisconsin started an investigation. But it sounds like once everything gets filtered through that process, a lot of the times you end up with kind of politics as usual, interfering with the public exposure of the final result of the investigation.
We have a comment here saying that the VA is a walking time bomb of criminality, that you're quoting you. I couldn't agree more with you, Ben. Thank you for advocating for the veterans. So
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Now, there's also, I noticed, a connection with Sharon Hellman, a slight connection with the Hines VA. Can you tell people that may not know who she is, a little bit of her backstory and about how she was connected to Hines and what's happening with her now?
Sure. Sharon Hellman did run Hines, as I understand it, for a little while. She went on to another location and then finally ended up at Phoenix VA. While at Phoenix, CNN exposed the widespread waitlist scandal, and it was kind of considered ground zero for the waitlist. Sharon Hellman did come public with her chief of staff chief of medical staff. They talked about the scandal publicly. They claimed that it didn't happen there. Then we found out very quickly later that, in fact, the waitlist scandal was ongoing and it was a problem and that veterans likely died. Then she was placed on, her and some of her administrative staff were all placed on administrative leave while it was investigated. During that time, they realized that Sharon Hellman falsified her disclosures. So each year, as I understand it, federal employees, especially at that level, are supposed to, at the SES level, so senior executive staff, are supposed to disclose the gifts that they get or their finances from other sources, etc. Apparently, Sharon Hellman, according to the allegations that were later apparently confirmed, made false representations about the gifts that she received, which included these were from a lobbyist, that included a trip to a Beyonce concert for her and her family, and also included a trip to, I think it was Disney World or Disneyland for her and her family, that she did not disclose. And so after that investigation concluded, I believe she is now a criminal because of that and was removed from the VA. Since then, she's been appealing her removal, citing changes to VA accountability that occurred in 2014 that, according to the then administration under President Obama, were believed to be unconstitutional. That case went up to the federal circuit, and I believe last week they reversed the position that disallowed an appeal of a termination at that stage. So basically, she fought pretty hard with her attorney and probably paid a lot of money to appeal this to the federal circuit. Won, but the win is really only to kick it back down to the MSPB and have them re-adjudicate at the board whether her termination was appropriate or not. Odds are they will determine it was appropriate and that she should have been fired for, making criminal false representations for which she is now guilty. So we'll just see what happens. But Sharon Hellman and some of her ilk have for a long time, and when I say some of her ilk, I'm referring to senior executive staff and VA. These are basically very high-level VA employees who generally operate above the law, or even at the GS-15 level, but generally it's the SES employees that operate without any concern of prosecution, and they really haven't been prosecuted or even successfully removed. There's even another case down in Puerto Rico where the former director there was caught with drugs that were not his and drunk in a car, supposedly. Numerous other issues, as well as hiring what did he do there? He hired somebody who was guilty of sex crimes and somebody else who was guilty of credit card fraud to run the accounting office related to contracting, and then the other was head of human resources. And so he brought them on, made numerous gaffes, but then, of course, is teaching other SES employees about leadership whenever VACO has their conferences, right? This guy is put on administrative leave. They try to fire him. He's appealing it, and now he's still floating around in the system somehow. So as it's written right now, the VA has very limited ability to hold anybody accountable, and I think the taxpayers should be extremely upset with the fact that they're paying very high salaries to individuals who then in their behind the scenes are running schemes. That guy that I was referring to out in Puerto Rico was trying to pay off a whistleblower to go away who busted him trying to illegally harass another whistleblower, which is essentially a RICO, act violation, where he's actively pressuring people to falsify police reports, etc., and going to use his budget from his hospital that's supposed to go to veterans to then pay off this whistleblower. And this guy's still not fully out of the VA, apparently. We thought he was gone, but I guess he's still working to appeal that decision. So it's almost like a lot of these individuals that I'm referring to, some of whom we know publicly, but others who are still behind the scenes, are sociopaths, and they don't seem to understand that their behavior is wrong. They believe that because they're doing it in the name of Uncle Sam, that somehow they can do whatever they want. We have operated with the Department of Justice for the past 8 years that was unwilling to generally prosecute very high-level employees, and hopefully we see a change now under President Trump.
I was going to say, it's hard for these people. We don't hold them accountable. So it's kind of like if you have that type of personality and you think you should be doing this stuff anyway, we don't stop them. And we have to stop these people from doing those things. And I agree with you. I hope under President Trump, think issues like this stop, and I hope David Shulkin goes after these people and brings them to justice. We have to know about this. And one thing, Ben, the mainstream media doesn't tell us this information that you're telling us today. So the American public is not going to know about this information because they're not told this information. And it's a tragedy that is perpetrated every day on veterans, but also the taxpayer. I mean, people forget that the Department of Veterans Affairs has the second largest budget in the government, and those tax dollars in many ways are being wasted on these bureaucrats who continue to break the law or thumb their nose at it. Yeah, we have a comment from Ed. He said he's also been fighting the VA for years and has found it impossible to hold the VA accountable. Congress has no authority over the VA to force accountability. The executive branch won't, and the federal courts are barred. So how do we veterans force accountability? Just complaining, he said, isn't working. So any thoughts for Ed there?
Well, there's a few different angles. So I'm working on some projects behind the scenes to encourage accountability. One of those projects is going to be, somebody's already doing this, but not in the way that I want to. So basically, I'm going to create a yellow book type of database aggregator for certain service providers related to VA employees. And so specifically what I'm referring to is the VOC rehab program. I'll also do this with the doctors, where instead of setting it up where you're only able to rate the facility, I want to set it up so that veterans are able to rate the service provider. Whoever it is that they interface with, I think veterans should be able to rate like a consumer. One of the areas that the VA has been successful is by holding their the names of their employees, or trying to anyway, hold them secret so that, us veterans can't know who they are. And they try to say that it's because veterans are scary. So we don't have access to certain records because we're scary, or some of these hyperbolic explanations about how veterans follow people around. So what I'm going to do is set up a database. I have the names already, and it's going to allow veterans to be able to chime in and give their 2 cents, kind of like the Better Business Bureau, where you can report a specific doctor maybe, or a specific clinic or whatever, and have the Better Business Bureau act as kind of a judge in between the two complaining parties. The goal there being to create a courtroom of public opinion so that veterans can at least be heard, and to generate a degree of pulling down the veil, so to speak, on the great Oz that is the VA, pulling the curtain back so that veterans can get the names, talk about their experiences, hopefully in a professional manner, and be able to force accountability in a direct manner against the specific employees that are wronging them or wronging other people. So that's one of the projects, because again, like the other commenter mentioned, it's really difficult to force accountability in the courts. Part of that being that if you have a doctor commit malpractice, you don't sue that doctor, you sue the U.S. government. And federal judges are going to be very strict in how they uphold the law, how they view the evidence, how they view the claims, etc. Whereas if you were suing any other doctor in any other capacity, it'd be you against that doctor, or against that specific clinic and the doctor. But when it comes to suing the VA, they are hidden behind this curtain. Similarly, with benefits, you can't even sue the benefit adjudicator anymore unless you're somehow able to prove up a civil RICO kind of situation. And I just haven't seen it. And the Department of Justice is definitely not interested in doing it to this point. I haven't seen one instance where a person within the VA is held accountable for harassing veterans. If anything, usually with respect to the IG, the only time that you'll ever see some kind of accountability is if a VA employee intentionally stole money or something along those lines, but it's rarely, if ever, for their treatment of a veteran, in which they're held accountable. You just don't see it. So we are very limited in our ability. I think the other component that veterans need to wake up about is that part of the reason that we are seeing so many individuals within the VA get away with problems is due in part to the collusion between the Department of Veterans Affairs and the veteran service organizations that have long time protected the VA and cultivated the veteran, or when I say cultivate, I mean more so like control the discourse between the VA and the veterans. And so they're kind of like the recess moderator that you maybe had when you were in kindergarten that would try to keep kids out of trouble. And so you see the VSOs do that, and they work hand in glove with the VA more often than not. And we're not able to really get outside of their thumb unless we're willing to go and pay for the types of services and help and press that these veteran organizations tend to, go light on. And when I say go light on, I mean the veteran organizations tend to not disparage or even bring up negative stories about the VA and its treatment of veterans only in broad terms. And so if veterans want to do something about it, we have to be willing to take out our own pocketbooks and pony up to come to the table and pony up our own money to get something done, whether that means that you need to hire an attorney, whether that means that you need to pay individual in the press to do a particular story and try to shop that around. We saw a fantastic grassroots effort with respect to the VA is Lying group, where the group's founder, which is just kind of an informal group, but VA is Lying, founded by Ron Nessler, a friend of mine, and he crowdsourced funding for billboards across the country, and that is how they forced at least a little bit of reform in different areas where the signs went up, where it said VA is lying, veterans are dying, and it was within reference to not only the waitlist scandal, but also the suicide scandal. That is something that veterans paid for out of their own pockets. VSOs wouldn't touch it. They would rarely ever talk about it because, again, we were highlighting the power of moving outside of their controlled dialogue between the VA and them by us calling a spade and saying, hey, VA is actually lying. We know they're lying all the time. Here's a billboard, and we're going to talk about it. It forced the conversation out of the clutches of the VSOs and out of the controlled media that the VA tends to be most comfortable in speaking with. So in order back to the question, what should veterans do? We can't sue, so now what? Well, it's the courtroom of public opinion. Good luck finding a reporter, though, who's going to be able to cover this, because most often they will not, because of their fear of an erosion of the relationship with the VA and them. And so in those instances, we need to pony up with our own money, with our own resources, with our own time, and do it just like we would have done it before in the field, where your commander's knocked out, so you got to pick up the gun and do whatever you got to do to make it happen. That's what veterans have to do here, because all of our commanders have been taken out. They've all been co-opted by the VA system, the corporate whore media, all that stuff. It's all been co-opted. These control grids need to be worked around, because that's all it is, a control grid for veterans. We need to wake up. The sooner the veterans wake up and realize the VSOs are not there to help you. The Department of Veterans Affairs is actually an insurance company. It used to be called the Bureau of War Risk Insurance, for Pete's sake. It has not changed much. There are some new pretty faces on the front billboards, but otherwise it's the same old schemes, same old policies, same old problems, same old corporate corruption with government contractors, and handouts for supporting a lot of, unfortunately, Democratic platforms. You're seeing this across the board, and veterans need to wake up. The second we wake up and we realize that we need to take the reins back and the control of what happens to us after we get out of the military, then we can start moving forward and moving in a direction that we control the dialogue. Right now, the dialogue needs to be focused on us being sick of contractor handouts for the purpose of political favors, corruption within the agency, and lack of accountability. We need to put it up. It's going to be on websites. Everyone's going to know the name of the perpetrators. They're going to have an opportunity to defend themselves publicly. And we're just going to see what happens. That's got to be the new media, the new approach to how we hold those folks accountable. Because, again, it is a cesspool of criminals. There are criminals all across the board. There are good people that are in the VA too, and we need to align ourselves with those good people. And unfortunately, I don't believe that a lot of the veteran organizations are doing that. Instead, what they're following are the political lines and talking points that they're affiliated with, and they're not actually getting in there and flushing out the whistleblower problems that we're seeing. And instead, they're supporting the power structures that have been in the VA for 80 plus years, however long it's been in creation in the current form. And we need to start working to reform that actively on our own. The VSOs don't have our back. We need to wake up. The court systems don't have our back. We need to wake up. We have this new media. We have an ability to get out there and broadcast just like we're doing it today on Facebook, on our own websites, with our own live stream, with our own newsletters, and start hitting the road and hitting the pavement and doing what we're all trained to do. We're trained to kick butt. Let's kick some butt. Let's stop, sulking around, complaining about the system that doesn't work for us, hasn't worked for 80 years. Let's get rid of it and start moving in our own direction.
While you were talking, Angel had some questions in regards to, HIPAA laws and how that's going to interfere with some things. And Roger said, does the recent Federal Circuit decision on aggregated claims certification look good for veterans' ability to bring class actions for the first time? How soon, if so?
Well, as I understand it, the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims is going to be promulgating new court rules for that. I have no way of knowing or predicting how quickly they will actually put those rules in place. My assumption is that the aggregation of claims could be a benefit. I'm not really sure. There are going to be issues with EJA fees and whatnot, so that'll be interesting to see how that works. But until the rules are in place and until somebody, hopefully from a big firm, tries out the new system, we really won't have an idea of how it's going to work. Up until this point, the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims has repeatedly shirked its ability to hear class action lawsuits, even though there was nothing precluding it from doing so. The Federal Circuit rightly concluded that the court was improperly refusing to provide veterans that type of recourse. Will it be to the question though, will it be something that helps reform the system? I don't know yet. I would hope, but we don't really have a great understanding of how that's going to roll out, because this is a court system that's a little bit different than a traditional Article III court. It's an Article I court. So how that might affect the way the rules are drafted, I'm not sure.
Someone else said that in Indiana, the transparency or accountability will never be allowed, not when all are complicit: feds, state boards, veterans groups, media, politics, Marxists, etc., supportive of hate and retaliation against veterans and people, to preserve all the corruption and professional courtesies that protect the aristocracy and many money junkies or vast number of quacks and corruption. And that's what you were saying, I think, Ben. Your point is that veterans need to be the ones that go forward for themselves, protect themselves, stand up for themselves. And he also said, by the way, I have not been able to know the real names of many corrupt VA staff or the contractors like Humana administration who refuse to talk to us or help. That also impacts your ability as a veteran to help yourself, though, doesn't it?
Sure. Without the name of the individual that you're trying to work with, you will have a very difficult time filling out a complaint form, even within traditional channels, such as filing an ethics complaint with the Department of Veterans Affairs, or a similar complaint with the Better Business Bureau, or through some other channel. It is very difficult to not know who you're talking to then be able to try to encourage accountability. So in those types of instances, which of course, that's the direction VA is going. VA does not want people to know how to reach the individual office. They don't want to engage with you. They want you to go into a call center and have to wait 45 minutes to get through to a live human being. And then at the end of the day, you're going to have a hard time talking about the issue because you don't know who it is that you're talking to. I think that that's a big problem. The VA knows that it's an advantage that they have to be able to try to claim that their names are somehow above top secret, which is absurd. I keep telling people within higher echelons of VA, you're the VA, not the NSA. Get it through your heads. What you're doing is not state secret. I'm sorry. Right. What you're doing is providing a service, whether you're a doctor, whether you're an adjudicator, whatever it is. Get beyond yourself. We don't live in Eastern Germany. Apparently some of you wish that we would, but that's not where we live. We live in a constitutional republic that is the United States of America. We've been here as a people for 250 odd years. Come on, let's get with the program. But unfortunately, we still have some bureaucrats in the system that are really moving towards that Marxist-Leninist type, Trotskyite, communist agenda, moving in that direction. And a lot of them, unfortunately, work within the VA. They work within a lot of other areas of the government. And our hope in exposing a lot of the problems we see within the VA is that it'll also expose resources and tools that average Americans, not just veterans, can use to do the same, whether it's at the Department of Health and Human Services or NSA or CIA or FBI or any of these other groups. When we are, as an American collective, when we are prosecuted improperly or treated improperly, we need tools to help to understand how to fix that system. And I think within the VA, we have a unique opportunity as Americans, as veterans, to get at those types of tools, learn how to expose the evildoers, and hopefully to force reforms. And I think the VA is a great area where we can fine-tune our systems and fine-tune our abilities to try to expose corruption and scandal.
Well, when you're talking about that, what other organization, would you be allowed to not tell people who you are or who they're talking to? Or, can you name one organization where that would be allowed?
Well, the NSA or CIA for sure.
Well, yeah, but I'm just talking, any other hospital, any other organization that takes care of it never would have happened.
No, if you were comparing it to most state employees or most hospitals, you would always know the name of the person you're calling. It's not something that you can keep secret. VA, on the other hand, is again holding itself out like it's the NSA, like some kind of state secrets that they're dealing with, when really they're just administering a hospital or vocational benefits or education benefits. Like, it's not rocket science. God knows it's not rocket science. Holy cow. There shouldn't be anything that requires that level of secrecy. Other than that, it's an agency that wants to demoralize a large group of veterans who are trained in classical warfare and other types of tools to be able to learn how to demoralize us so that then they can turn and use those same types of systems against the American public whenever they roll out the single-payer system, when all of America then comes under the draconian VA-type system that manages our lives.
Roger has a question, and he said, where are we on trying to get lawyers equal access to e-records or at least e-benefits?
So the VA will tell you that they're very close, and they're working so hard, Roger. By the way, good to hear from you, buddy. They're working very hard to get people like Roger access to things. And they'll say, check in next year, and we're going to be working just really hard. And gosh, we hear what you're saying, and we are working at it really hard. So to Roger's question, I have a pending lawsuit, a petition challenge in the Federal Circuit against the Department of Veterans Affairs with respect to its VBMS system, Virtual Benefit Management System, to hopefully reform how it is that they make those rules, because right now they are evading notice and comment. They don't want to go through notice and comment related to lawyer access to that. I don't know why. They don't want to have regulations on point, even though they have regulations on point for practically every other type of computer system in the VA. When it comes to VBMS, they don't want to have that type of check and balance. They want to be able to hold the ace up their sleeve. And my point in challenging a recent rule adjudication, informal rule adjudication, is to at least force the issue in front of the judges so the judges understand that the VA is doing this and that they should be forced to have a regulation on point that goes through notice and comment. But the agency just doesn't want to do it. Instead, they want to have it such that there is no kind of review process where they control all the cards related to attorney access and related to the types of computer systems that attorneys can use when they're practicing law. I think it's inappropriate. So my hope is that we can encourage the VA to behave like a rational actor instead of what we've been seeing to this point with, cloak and dagger type secrecy within an agency that's supposed to be serving veterans.
Ben, what's happening lately in terms of the VA providing optometry and audiology within the VA?
Well, we're trying to get to the bottom of that. I had it on good authority from a whistleblower who's a director of a VA facility, I won't name which one, who had told me that during a speech in Leesburg, Virginia, that the director had mentioned that they should stop using VA optometry and start, quote, choicing it out. So choicing it out means using veteran choice and government contractors for that because, and again, quote, there is a lens crafters on every corner. And so what we end up seeing here, and apparently behind the scenes, there's a lot more to the story than what meets the eye. He used the term lens crafters, which is interesting because lens crafters is reportedly a company that has lobbied the VA for access to that contract for many, many years. And lens crafters is owned by an Italian company that is an international, multinational company that is about to be bought up by another multinational company that is also foreign owned. If VA does outsource those contracts en masse to lens crafters, it will undermine many service-disabled, veteran-owned companies that presently provide those services. I didn't know that, and so this was a new thing that came up after I had reported on what he had said about lens crafters. But basically, there are two bad things that can occur. First, VA is required to contract with small businesses and veteran-owned businesses and service-disabled veteran-owned businesses for a lot of its work. Presently, a lot of these smaller businesses provide the frames, glasses, things like that once they're ordered through the VA optometry system. Apparently, VA optometry is a type of service as well as audiology that the VA can provide. They're actually really good at it. You know, VA isn't great at everything, but this optometry and audiology thing, they've been doing it for 80 years. They're really good at this. It's not obviously invasive, it's not surgery, but they're really great at providing a lot of these services. And so the service-disabled veteran-owned companies then provide the lenses and the other equipment. Lens Crafters has apparently been trying to get that contract for some time and has been lobbying the VA for it, like I had said before. One of the other problems with outsourcing this is that once you outsource an entire area of healthcare, you can't get it back. You can't get the institutional knowledge that you lose once you get rid of it, which is also a part of why VA has had so many problems for the past 20 years, because President Clinton, from 93 to 2000, presided over one of the largest guttings of the federal government, and especially the VA, that had ever occurred before. And what they ended up doing was gutting a lot of areas that required legacy knowledge or institutional knowledge. Once you do away with those types of skill sets, it's gone forever. So an example of that would be the upkeep of the VISTA system, where they had people internally working on this data structure that's enormous for the Veterans Health Administration. They gutted a lot of those jobs, so then they stopped upkeeping it and they outsourced that to the private sector. Now VISTA is a complete train wreck. As I understand it, it hasn't been updated. There's lots of problems with it. And they're looking at, of course, outsourcing the whole thing altogether to a private contract, probably with IBM, to include an interface with IBM Watson. So IBM stands to have a big win here with respect to the VA, as well as maybe Epic or whatever companies are coming along the board. Now, wouldn't you know that IBM was also one of the initial advisors to VA back in the 90s under Bill Clinton when they gutted those systems. Today, we could see the same type of thing occur with optometry, where they don't. VA is one of the biggest trainers of new optometrists and ophthalmologists and other individuals, working on eyes of anywhere in the U.S. And one of the things that the VA does that is very unique to what Lens Crafters does is they focus on eye degeneration and other types of problems that veterans face. And veterans, by and large, are at a different aggregate age group, meaning that the mean average is something like 65, whereas the mean average of those treated by Lens Crafters is 35. So you have a substantial difference in how the eye is evolving and functioning for that type of individual. And they won't be tracking things like degeneration and other kinds of eye diseases that the VA is very good at tracking. Again, eyes and ears is something the VA happens to do really well. Now, I wouldn't necessarily want the VA cutting my eye. I don't like VA surgeries. That scares the hell out of me because they're really hard to sue. But when it comes to treating and non-invasive procedures, I would not mind going to the VA for that type of thing, maybe. I mean, personally, I don't like going to the VA for anything. But when it comes to eye care, I know a lot of veterans get really good eye care from them. So that's a little bit of the background about Lens Crafters. I've asked the public affairs group at VA for comment, and they have refused to provide one to this point. So I may end up writing a story about it and publishing it on the Hill once I have a little bit more information. But this is an example of, personally, I'm a big fan of allowing veterans to choose where to get their health care. I definitely don't want the VA to just completely do away with VA optometry or VA audiology. I think it's a good program. Now, the other part of the coin for that is apparently Shulkin was encouraging the directors to take the money that would have been, the supposed savings from not doing that, and then instead choicing it out and taking the money away from the choice budget, taking the money left over then in the budget and using it to fix the VA facilities that are having a lot of problems. And so they're in a sense encouraging these directors to rob from Peter to pay Paul, when really the issue is that they just need more money. So that's a little bit more about it than you probably hope to hear, but that's the rest of the story on the LensCrafters outsourcing possibility.
Well, and another person was saying that, they feel pretty much alone here because too many fear losing their health care or from all the retaliation and harm from the corruptness that's going on, the corruption. Veterans groups don't want to get involved. Hands are tied. So he keeps praying and hoping for change, especially for the younger generation. And he wanted to thank you for what you do, what I do. And see, that to me is really ridiculous, meaning that veterans are put in that position angers me, and I know you and I have talked about this stuff before. And I've been waiting, not for 80 years, but for as long as I've been alive, I've been waiting for the VA to change. And I'm seeing tiny bits of hope. And I'm like you said before, it may take about 6 months before we really see if there's really going to be any change under Shulkin and what changes. But it's ridiculous that you you have to feel that way about trying to get help. It's, I don't understand. And again, the public, and I can assure you this, the public doesn't know as much about this as the veterans, of course, and what you know. We're kept in the dark about a lot of this because I think the public would be totally outraged if they knew more about it.
Well, sure. And one of the things, too, to bring up about VSOs, I am aware of some degree of research about what VSOs actually do, which has more to do with population management than much else. We think it's a good old boy system, but it's actually a system in place that's been studied and is in place, at least in part, for the purpose of population control. So it's important to realize that. But in addition to that, with veterans that are using VSOs to get help with their benefits, one of the new schemes that the VA has come out with, which is a fraud scheme, is that they're educating VSOs to encourage veterans to file requests for reconsideration or to reopen their claim instead of filing appeals. To give a little bit of background on this, it's been a battle for a little while where if a veteran files an appeal after they get a decision back on their disability compensation that they don't agree with, they file a notice of disagreement, they hold the effective date open from the point at which they made that claim to begin with. If they ask for reconsideration or to reopen their claim rather than do the appeal, it becomes two new claims, and so the VSO that helps them with that gets to chalk up new claims instead of just basically saying it's an appeal, so they get higher numbers, more of a churn. In addition to that, when they do a request for reconsideration, for example, they're mooting out the effective date. And so it might take an additional year to get the benefits to go through when they request reconsideration or to reopen. VA is actually, and I've heard this from enough resources to where I know that this is happening, they're training the VSOs to do it. They're training the VSOs to, they're what are called national service officers on the ground to file claims in this way. It ends up ramping up the numbers for the initial claims. It moots out the appeal in the way that it should be. And the veteran gets screwed out of about a year's worth of back pay. And so if you're a veteran that's at 10% and you really should have 100% permanent total or 100% total disability, individual and employability, something like that, you're going to miss out on $36,000 of tax-free money that's yours. You're entitled to that. And the VA is actively training these, quote, free, again, you get what you pay for, but free help from VSOs, and the VSOs are actually giving legal advice, which is against the law in most states, and telling veterans to do things that are a part of this fraud scheme by the VA, perpetrated by the VA, to keep the claims down that they pay out. So that's going on. It's a nationwide problem. I have asked again for comment from public affairs about it, and they've refused to provide feedback again. This is one thing I had a pretty good chain going for a little while with them. And up until I stopped, towing any kind of party line, which is generally what I don't do anyway. I don't, tow a party line. But up until I was critical about one of Trump's decisions publicly, like they went along with it, but now they don't give me quotes anymore. So I got to keep on them about it because it's important. The American public needs to know what's going on. And if they're higher level officials within the VA are actively engaged in, pay for play or things like that, the American public needs to know. I mean, very recently I had found communications between John Podesta and a government contractor talking about how he needed help from the VA, and then invited Podesta as a very high level fundraiser in the Indian American community, invited Podesta for dinner. They did dinner. I found out since that point that there's been, some back and forth within the VA related to this guy's contracts, and has been going on for some time. And it sounds like there's definitely a pay-for-play scheme, and their emails came out in WikiLeaks.
Wow. And
so we were able to read the discussion about the food that they were preparing and, whatever. It's just really interesting how that came up. But now we're wondering, as we look at potentially Thomas Murphy being appointed to the new benefits secretary. Right now he's the acting benefits secretary. If he is appointed as the best candidate, we really need to look into his background and verify whether he's been in bed with contractors, whether he is really the best person for the job here, or if he's too in bed with government contractors to be able to be trusted to make a decision that's actually in the best interest of the veteran community.
Unbelievable. You may have answered this question for Ed already, but he says, have you reviewed the proposed reforms to the appeals process? I'm worried they're going to weaken a veteran's ability to get justice. For example, I appealed a service connection and won an appeal, but the VA assigned the wrong effective date, appealed and won the correct date. Then they assigned the wrong rating, appealed and won the correct rating. Will that process remain intact? That's unbelievable.
Well, Ed, it sounds like you were a victim of a stupid employee, or maybe 10 or 12. And unfortunately, no amount of reforms within legislation will help, because we know that in the example you just provided, they weren't following the law anyway. So changing the laws, obviously they don't care, so they're not going to follow the new ones either. The problem is that we have no recourse against employees that screw veterans. So until they create some form of recourse and compensation for veterans that includes interest on the amount improperly withheld, which this is also part of the scheme and part of the way that VA can devalue veterans' claim by pushing it out further. If you think about how capital markets work, with respect to any kind of payout, the reason that in civilian court that they force companies to pay interest is to help avoid a problem where companies will improperly withhold payouts, put the money in another investment to earn interest, and then devalue the amount of the actual settlement or the actual judgment. And so when that kind of thing happens, you'll see some kind of structured payout that includes interest. With the VA, that doesn't happen. So if the VA, let's hypothetically say, ignores the law, they adjudicate a claim going back to, like, let's say 1945, and that veteran somehow magically wins on their deathbed, right? A World War II veteran, they went on their deathbed, and come to find out the VA, ignored the law in 1945. It was a big mistake, and now the guy wins. The VA doesn't pay interest. And so what that means in the VA's context is the veteran gets paid out at yesterday's dollars, not today's dollars. Wow. And so as we have inflation, as inflation is added to each year's disability compensation payouts, back in say 1945, a disability compensation payout for 100% might have been $200 or less. I'm not even sure what it would have been back then. So that veteran who should have been rated at 100% back then, instead of receiving all the money today in today's dollars, he receives it or she receives it at yesterday's dollars for each year. So each year is discounted all the way back to 1945. And then accrued. So instead of getting, like, let's say at the 100%, today it would be like $36,000. For the year of 1946, where they did it improperly, that veteran would receive a whopping $2,040, right? But in today's dollars, it would have been $33,000. Well, what good does that do you? You weren't getting the money in 1946 when you could have invested it. That's how the VA is able to push off the cost of war by improperly denying benefits, paying us out at yesterday's dollars instead of today's dollars, and making the cost of war effectively less, or the cost of disability less, by depreciating our payout. Instead of, again, today you get paid at $1945, which, I mean, you could buy a house for $4,000 back then. I mean, good luck, doing that today. So there are a lot of different insurance schemes within the VA. And again, the VA used to be called the Bureau of War Risk Insurance. It is nothing else than a big insurance company with fancier names, a fancier website. They call themselves different things, and they have different kinds of lavish parties than maybe what would have had before. But at the end of the day, it's an insurance company. They're there to adjudicate insurance. Unfortunately, they've also picked up the sideline business of health care. I don't think that they should be housed in the same agency. They should split those apart. I mean, you might as well just have the insurance company do insurance stuff like we have today, like an HMO. And then the healthcare providers independently provide health, so then they don't have a conflict of interest. But instead, what we have today is a health agency that also adjudicates its access to health for insurance. And so you end up with an interesting conflict where veterans aren't getting the kind of health care that they should get, that they would get if they were in the private sector. And instead, VA is able to kind of laugh all the way to the bank, so to speak. And again, it's because it's an insurance company that happens to also have a healthcare arm. But by and large, it's an insurance company, and that's all it is. It's all it'll ever be.
Well, we have about just a couple minutes left. I want to get a quick question from Angel. She said, I've been sitting on 40% since 2006. Recently was forced to open a new claim for reevaluation under threat of having my benefits reduced or even possibly losing them completely. Are we always supposed to file appeals instead of opening new claims?
That's a good question, Angel. So you want to file an appeal or notice of disagreement within the first year. And after that point, generally speaking, you would file to reopen based on new material evidence. Veterans who unfortunately don't appeal within that time window are required to come to the table with new material evidence. Generally speaking, there are some other criteria to reopen the claim too. But when they don't file a notice of disagreement within that first year, or instead, of course, they file the reconsideration or something like that. But if they don't do anything, then you have to come to the table with new and material evidence to get your claim to be reopened. And then that hopefully that new and material evidence will help you get service connected. But it's important that you appeal within the 12-month component. With the new regulations and what VA wants to do, they've been wanting to shorten that window substantially for some time. They haven't been able to get there yet, but they window or close the window before the 12-month period, and that's what they're working towards. But for your claim in 2006, reopening it, and again, this isn't legal advice, it's just kind of general conversation here. You would want to, make sure that you're filing the requisite information that the regulation states to get your claim to reopen. Otherwise, if you're within the 12-month window, and if you really disagree, then make sure that you file appropriate paperwork.
Well, it sounds to me in the last minute or two that we have here that, there's a lot more work that's yet to be done for the Veterans Administration. We're going to really need to watch this continually in the public eye and get more information out to them, have more shows like this where a lot of people can share this information with the general public. And the veterans that are listening today, I would say share this with everyone, not just other veterans. Other veterans know what's going on. It's the general public that needs to know this type of information. So I want to say thank you so much, Ben, for you being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. And I hope you and I can do more of these shows and we can inform the public. Mm-hmm. And everybody go to Ben's website at disabledveterans.org and read all of his articles. And Ben's always got his finger on the pulse of everything that's going on. Ben, if you could hold on just 1 second. And everybody, again, thank you so much for being here. And until next time, when we have another great guest, I'll see you then on Stand for Truth Radio. Thanks so much and take care.